So this is the third video on working through number 9 on page 93. And I've got my GUI designed and I want to create the code. So I am going to have a click event, that's what my toe chart said, for this button. So I'm going to double click to open up that event procedure, button count click. And here's what I'm doing. I've written out the algorithm. So I'm going to get my input here from the text boxes. I'm going to calculate the total number of pounds by adding together my inputs. I'm going to calculate the total cost by multiplying it by 1165, and then I'll display the output. Okay? So I'm going to have to create variables and pounds. Am I going to allow them to use any decimal places? Maybe somebody might order 5.5 pounds. So I'm going to create dec regular pounds as decimal. And so I'm creating a couple of variables to hold my input. Okay, now, do I need anything else? Well, I need variables to hold my output. So then I'm also going to create a couple of variables. Oops, I should say dim. To hold my output. Okay, so I went ahead and finished all the variables. So I have my variables for input here, my variables that will store the result of the calculations, and also I'm going to have a constant of the price per pound. So notice that the standard there for constants is we're going to use capitals, and that's just so when you're programming, the programmer recognizes that as a constant and you cannot change the value. We're not asking the user to input the constant. If I had to input the amount of pounds, I might input 0. So no, we're going to store that. Okay, so now I got to get my input. Okay, so here's the code to get the input. This is the method that was this was the method that was introduced in this chapter. It's called try parse, and it's on page 87. And what happens is it looks at the input in this first argument that's in the text property of our text box we put down, and it's going to say, hey, is that a decimal? If it, some kind of a number. If it is, put it into this variable that we created up here to hold the input. If for some reason, if I entered mom or some string, then it would fail gracefully and not crash the program, Well, this is what was introduced in the last chapter, and maybe it makes more sense. Both of these end up doing the same thing. So I just thought I'd show it to you. So this also looks at what the user input. The val says convert it to a number and store it into this variable. Both work. This is actually the better way to do it, because if you enter a string, if I entered yes, then this will not crash the program, but this will. Well, the next thing we did was the calculations, and there's two things we need to calculate because we're going to show, and that is how much, okay, and also, so I added together how many regular pounds there are and how many decaf pounds there are, and I'm storing it in total pounds. The next statement is, well, how much is it going to cost? And so I take that total and I multiply it by our constant name, which is storing 1165 and storing it in that variable. Now I'm ready to display the output. And so the output for the total pounds is going into the text property of this label. And there's no formatting I have to do to it. So I just take that variable and assign it to the text property. The output for the total cost, you will see, is formatted, and that's shown on page 91. And so I'm going to show 2 decimal places and have a $sign. That's what that to string and then C2 does, and show that in the text. Now I'll run it and see how it works. Okay, in order to test, you need to have an idea if what the answer will be. So I pull up my calculator. I'm going to test for a total pounds of 11. I multiply it by 1165, so I should get 128.15. So let's say I order 6 pounds of regular coffee, 5 pounds decaf. I click the calculate button. It does total 11, and it agrees. As I'm looking, I can see some improvements. I think I'd resize these labels and maybe right align it. But other than that, we're done.